Our lecture today is both going to be about design styles and the Bauhaus. And we're going to start with something that we haven't even talked about yet, architecture. So we're going to look at the Crystal Palace, which was created by Joseph Paxton in 1851. The location is London, and this location houses the very first World's Fair. It's an absolutely gigantic structure, covers 18 acres worth of property, but it was built in only 9 months by unspecialized workers. This is the first prefabricated building. Also, the architect, Joseph Paxton, he wasn't an architect. He was a landscaper. And what we see here is basically a gigantic greenhouse. But it's also the very first time we have a modern building. And the way that modern buildings are separated out from buildings of antiquity is because of the technique. This is what's called the skeleton and skin system. We'll talk about this during the modern architecture lecture, but it's basically you have a strong supporting material, in this case, newly developed cast iron, and then we have a skin that protects the skeleton. In your home, it might be plaster, brick, drywall, aluminum siding, whatever. Here, it's glass. And so this building was the first time this type of technique was used. And it's really a cool space. And we're going to talk about this more during the modern architecture lecture. But the idea is here we are in 1851, just prior to the beginnings of modern art in terms of painting and sculpture, but we see it in architecture first. Sadly, though, this building no longer exists. The cast iron was wrapped in wood, and I forget what was inside of the structure, but it caught fire. The wood caught on fire, and basically it was so hot that the glass melted. And there are newspaper reports of molten glass running down the streets. But here we are 8 years later in 1859, where we have this next home that's being built. It's called the Red House, and it is the home of William Morris. William Morris is going to be the founder of the arts and crafts movement. But this home is not at all modern. It is Gothic revival, and it stands in opposition to the Crystal Palace. So we have a certain faction of our society that's moving toward modernism, and we also have another faction that's really looking back to earlier times and saying that these times were better. So don't think everyone was on the bandwagon with either modern art or architecture. And so I want to talk about the arts and crafts movement, since William Morris, the builder of that house, was involved with this style. This is a revolt against the new age of mechanization. They believe that true art should be both beautiful and useful, and should base its forms on those found in nature, which of course are going to be organic and curvilinear. This is an art style that is based in England in the late 1800s, right around 1860. And I'll show you a picture of William Morris. This is really a Renaissance man. This is a person who was an artist, a craftsman, designer, social reformer, and writer. He wrote a tremendous amount. When you think about how the old encyclopedias used to look, there were like 26 volumes. Think about William Morris's writings being about 26 volumes in their entirety. He also wrote several individual books that were fiction-based. He was interested in the renewal of simplicity, beauty, and craftsmanship, and he opened up his own company, Morris and Company, in 1861. Right after he built the Red House, he could not find enough high-quality handmade goods to fill the house, so he just started his own company. He's also classified as a pre-Raphaelite, which means that after Raphael dies in 1520, and this is one of the great Renaissance artists along with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. They believed after his death, art began its decline. Morris and Company made everything for the home. We have at the right here a candlestick. We have stained glass windows, picture and mirror frames. But what they're really noted for is textiles. These are all museum pieces today, and these would have been created on hand looms. They would have used hand-dyed thread, and this is unfortunately one of the poor things about Morris and Company, is that Morris wanted to make high-quality handmade goods for the common man, and when it came down to it, the common man really couldn't afford objects like these. But again, think about the curvilinear design and definitely the organic motif that you see here. He also broke his manufacturing into two different classifications once he figured out that the common man couldn't afford everything he was producing. So we had a lower quality product, in this case for some furniture, and this is called workaday furniture, compared to his state furniture. And here we have lush, rich velvet. We have some hand-painted scenes of the personification of love in the background. And he also opened up his own press called Kelmscott Press. This was established in 1888, devoted to the books which Morris deemed as beautiful. And so mostly what he would do is publish works that he or his friends created. A lot of it is poetry. However, the best known work to come out of Kelmscott Press is the complete works of Chaucer. And I'm going to show you a couple of pages from this book, and you can see how incredibly beautiful it is. Morris himself is responsible for creating the Chaucer font, which you see here. His friend, Edward Burne-Jones, created all the illustrations. So every element of this book was thought about. Now, I had also mentioned that he wrote a couple of books, and Morris was among the first to write epic tales of fantasy and adventure. If you like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you'll absolutely love the books that he wrote. This one, The Well at the World's End, I've had some past students read it, and they've absolutely loved it. So if that's kind of your style of book, you should definitely check this one out. Morris is looked at as the inspiration for authors such as C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. Unfortunately, William Morris is going to die fairly young at the age of 62 in 1896. But after that, the arts and crafts movement continues on, and we see it arriving in America. And Gustav Stickley is an American furniture maker. That's what he's most famous for. But he also wrote a magazine called The Craftsman that embraced the arts and crafts style. This is a magazine that inspired Frank Lloyd Wright and his early buildings, such as the Roby House. Now, the Roby House is the very first of what's going to be called Prairie style architecture. When we look at this house, it sits on a really long, narrow strip of land. So this home was designed specifically for this site in mind. The material was quarried from local quarries, and also there's a definite horizontality to this home. And you also think about how prairies are very horizontal. The rooftop, the cantilevered roof, is a new design. It's very innovative because we've just learned how to do steel reinforced concrete. But this is a home built unlike any other home has been. Frank Lloyd Wright has a very Eastern sensibility because he spent a lot of time working in Japan. And so instead of creating the outer perimeter walls first, what he does is he creates the living room and then works out from this as the center of the home, and then he works out to the perimeter. He thinks that the fireplace and the living room are the most important parts of a home because this is where family interaction occurs. We also have a tremendous amount of windows in Frank Lloyd Wright homes to let in natural light, to keep artificial light at a minimum. And we're going to also find out that these modern architects like Frank Lloyd Wright and Rudolf Schindler, Antonio Gaudí, they had to create the furniture for these homes as well, not just the home. So on the continent of Europe, we're looking at the style of Art Nouveau beginning in the late 1800s. So arts and crafts is very English, begins in 1860, runs through the early 1900s. In 1895, the Gallery of Art Nouveau opens up in Paris. This is the Gallery of the New Art. And one of the names that's kind of lost to art history is Siegfried Bing. This is a person who traveled extensively throughout Europe and the United States. And when he got back from his travels, that's when he opened up this gallery. Now, the definition for Art Nouveau is a design style that is characterized by undulating, curvilinear, and organic forms. So it sounds a lot like the arts and crafts movement. However, these people embrace new materials and technologies. This would have made William Morris roll over in his grave, right? William Morris in arts and crafts is all about the past. They love the idea of the Renaissance. They love the idea of the medieval ages where the worker and his craft were highly interconnected. But here, these people embrace the machine. It is going to be the dominant style of the early 1900s, and it's going to end right around the time we see World War I beginning. And this is the type of style that we would have. The wisteria lamp made by Tiffany Studios, and Siegfried Bing met Louis Comfort Tiffany, and they were friends. And so here you have definitely that organic motif, that curvilinear line, but we're employing technology here. We're making artificial light that's colored, which would never exist in true interiors. And Art Nouveau really encaptures every element of art. We have the peacock vase to the left, great sculpture off there to the right, drawing and painting, the portrait of Adela Bloch-Bauer done in 1909, absolutely in the Art Nouveau style. And look at these posters. We have the image at the left is all about, it's actually an advertisement to try to sell you salad dressing. But look at the hair on these two figures. It's just filling up all the empty space in this poster. The poster at the right is of a manufacturing company, and that is allegedly egg yolks being separated from egg whites. And Art Nouveau even gets into architecture. And architecture is a place where we look at the formal element of space being the most important element. But here, line really takes the lead and forms this structure. And Art Nouveau is also going to kind of end its run right at the beginning of World War I. As we emerge out of the First World War, though, we're going to have Art Deco. And it's almost the exact opposite of Art Nouveau and arts and crafts. The defining characteristics of this style are 90-degree angles, straight lines, geometric shapes, and the use of modern materials. It's going to be very popular during the 1920s and into the early 1930s. The name originates from a World's Fair, the International Exposition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts. So it's basically the World's Fair of 1925, which took place in Paris. And I'll show you the poster here. Now, early Art Deco is kind of a hybrid in between that Art Nouveau style, a little bit of curvilinear line, a little bit of organic motif. But by the time we get into the 1920s, this is the design style. Straight lines, 90-degree angles, geometric shapes, and the employment of new materials. So this is made from Bakelite, the world's first synthetic plastic. Now, Paul Frankel was one of the major designers in New York. And you saw skyscraper end table, and this is skyscraper bookcase. His studio was right down the street from the Empire State Building. And this was the new form that would be seen on the New York skyline. So that it is kind of what's informing this new type of design that Paul Frankel is creating these objects out of. Skyscraper chair at the left. And again, just like Art Nouveau, Art Deco really gets into every little bit of design during these years. We have some graphic design at the left and a tea service at the right. Look what's happened to the figure on the front cover of Vogue magazine. It has become an abstracted figure. And remember back to that definition about abstraction, where we start to change these elements from organic to more man-made and geometric, where we're going from curvilinear line to straight line. Look what happens to the hairstyles of the 1920s. They're very short, they're very straight, maybe even we could consider that a boyish haircut. And it's not at all like these designs that we had during Art Nouveau. We also have, especially here in Los Angeles, some great Art Deco buildings that are right downtown. So Art Deco happens in both America and in Europe, but particularly in Holland we have a different style called de Stijl, which is translating into the style. It's defining characteristics, besides clarity, certainty, and order, is that these artworks are simple, they're based on 90-degree angles, straight lines, and geometric shapes. So Holland is one of the countries that is most hardest hit by the First World War. And this is really kind of a recovery time for them. And the only analogy I can really give you is that when you think about being really sick, you're not going to go out for some fancy foods or anything like that. You want some pretty basic foods. You want some toast, maybe some eggs, maybe some soup, and that's really about it. And that's really what this kind of art is like. It's very, very basic. And of course, this is where we have Mondrian coming into the fold with his famous composition of red, blue, and yellow. Even though there's a lot going on here, we still have a very, very basic design. And we even have some cool furniture. I was thinking about even making one of these chairs because it really is kind of like a three-dimensional Mondrian puzzle. But when I got down to it, I just didn't think that that would be very comfortable to sit on. But this style is absolutely in museums throughout the world. We had it at the LA County Museum of Art. Now, over in Russia, we had the Tsarist monarchy falling in 1917, and Lenin rises to power. And so we have Russian constructivism, or what's also called Russian suprematism. This is also a design style based on 90-degree angles and straight lines, geometric shapes. So even though, and definitely they have different genesis, and they have different meanings, but keep in mind that we're looking at the overall aesthetic style of Art Deco, de Stijl, and Russian constructivism, which happens all at the same time throughout the globe. The outward appearance of these objects are very similar, very much the same. This is also where we get these types of paintings from Kazimir Malevich that we talked about earlier on with non-objective art. Now this leaves us with streamlining. And as we get into the mid-1930s, we have streamlining taking over. So you can kind of see like a pendulum going back and forth between two extremes. We started off with arts and crafts and Art Nouveau, very organic and curvilinear. The pendulum swings to the other side of Art Deco, to Stijl, Russian constructivism, and now that pendulum is swinging back to that organic and curvilinear line. What's great about streamlining is it is distinctly American. We are the ones who developed this art style. So its defining characteristic is a teardrop-shaped line offering the least amount of resistance to a current of air. That this design yields maximum efficiency. And so absolutely a curvilinear line is involved. This train is really what set streamlining into motion. It's roughly 1,000 miles between Chicago and Denver, Colorado. This train left Denver, bound for Chicago. It should take 26 hours to get there, but because of the streamlining of this train, the lower center of gravity, it made it in 13 hours and 5 minutes. And after that, everything became streamlined. Everything from planes down to automobiles. And this is the Chrysler Airflow, a completely crappy car. Do never, ever, ever buy one. It was only in production for 4 years, but aesthetically, it was absolutely beautiful. Raymond Loewy ran the largest design firm on the East Coast. And again, he designed everything from trains down to cigarette packages. We've got our dinnerware here that is streamlined. This great chair. And even this chair. And I don't know when you went to school, but I'll tell you, this is the chair that we had when I was in grade school and even junior high. And I mean, yeah, it's cool. It's streamlined. It was not very comfortable to sit in, but had I known it was important and stylistic, maybe I would have enjoyed school a little bit more then. So now I want to tell you about the Bauhaus. And the Bauhaus is, at its very basis, it's an art school. And not just of art, but also design. And all art at this school, no matter what it was, whether it was painting, whether it was sculpture, whether it was graphic design or photography, everything had equal importance. It's also that the first time we have a school that is a modernist school. We've moved away from very traditional teachings of like linear perspective, and all of a sudden we have avant-garde art being taught. It opens in Germany in 1919, but when Hitler rises to power, we've already talked about his hatred of modern art, and he closes the art school in 1933 for it being, quote, un-German. Now, the Bauhaus had 4 different locations where it had moved, but it's that last location in Dessau where this is like the Bauhaus that we know of. Unfortunately, after Hitler closes the Bauhaus, it becomes a Nazi Party headquarters. And at the end of World War II, this is what that building looked like. And it is one of the most important modernist buildings ever created. The architect, his name was Walter Gropius, and luckily for really America, a lot of these artists who were teaching at the Bauhaus, a lot of the students, absolutely the director, they all immigrated, not only to certain parts of Europe, but most of them eventually immigrated to America to make this country the pinnacle of the art world in 1945 when World War II ends. This is the famous Bauhaus staircase. And you see a lot of windows on the walls here of the Bauhaus. You can look totally through this building. Here's one of the classrooms. You can see absolutely very modernist designs. I'm going to walk you through some of the teachers that were there teaching. We also have the Google Doodle from spring of 2019. This is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. He is actually Russian, fought on the Russian front during World War I, came to the Bauhaus to teach photography and graphic design. The radio tower there in the image at the left is one of the cool images in photography because instead of taking a picture of the tower from the ground looking up, he climbed up on top of the tower and took the absolutely opposite image of the ground. Really cool graphic design image at the right. Also created sculpture, and at the right, this is a sound machine. Joseph Albers and his wife Annie were both students who became professors at the Bauhaus. Annie Albers we'll talk about later when we talk about textiles and our craft versus fine art lecture. That's what she's noted for. Joseph Albers, absolutely graphic design and also glass making. The image that you see at the left is molten glass. Paul Klee, we discussed him in the art theft lecture. He's one of the teachers that Hitler removed from the Bauhaus, and he was a surrealist painter. Oskar Schlemmer was the director of the Bauhaus Theater, and he was also a sculptor. Marcel Breuer, famous for the person that created steel-tubed chairs, such as the Vasily, which you see in the lower left-hand side. And Nam Gabo, who was among the last people to leave the Bauhaus. Literally, Nazi troops were coming into his studio one door as he was leaving out the door on the other side of the studio. And he's famous for these wonderful sculptures that are made from lucite, and then we've got nylon thread wrapped around them. And some of these are fairly small, like this one that you see. This is from the LA County Museum of Art. But he's made some that are as high as 12 feet. And with that, that's going to end our lecture on design styles and the Bauhaus.